Hello, and welcome to Speaking Frankly, where we feature honest talk with thought leaders across the advertising ecosystem and beyond. I am Kim Frank, your host and Geopath president. I am very excited today to be joined by Leslie Wood. She is the Chief Research Officer at NC Solutions. So Leslie is an absolute legend in the market research industry. She has won a ton of awards. She was celebrated by the Market Research Council. She was named to the Hall of Fame in 2017. She has received 2 ARF Great Minds Awards. And in 2019, she was awarded the incredibly prestigious Irwin Efron Demystification Award. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is so my pleasure to be here with you, Kim.
Thanks. So since I know you, but not everyone knows you, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, your career, your expertise?
So I was trained as a mathematician, and I really come to this with more of a math point of view. I was raised by 2 artists in Greenwich Village, so I have a very strong creative side to me, and I think it's been the math with the creative that is sort of the hallmark of what I do. I've been here at NC Solutions for 10 years. 10 years, not quite the beginning, but very close to the beginning of the company. Have done lots and lots of work in building thought leadership for the industry. What's interesting is that every time single source data became available, I thought it was the most amazing stuff that existed. And I dropped whatever I was doing and was like a moth to flame. And so I've worked with every single source data set we've had, in America ever. So I consider myself probably the subject matter expert on single source data, and love to be doing what I'm doing with it.
So in case any of our listeners don't know, what is single source data and why is it so important?
So single source is the collection of purchasing data and exposure data from the same consumer, matching them up, being able to say, oh, you can use it really fundamentally in 2 ways. One is to say who was exposed, right? So you can then say, what was the incremental value of that exposure? So how did advertising contribute? And the other way to look at it is to say, I want to target people who buy XYZ, and we know who buys those products and can give you a target for them. And those are the main functional areas. We also now do something called optimization and what ifs with our models, so that it's a full cycle. You can look at what happened. You can then measure how well it did, target them, optimize and then target. So, it's an OODA loop that goes around and around and improving what's delivered.
Great. So tell me a little bit about NCS. What do you do? What is your primary core business? How does it work?
So we're a joint venture between Nielsen and Catalina, and we have access to almost all of the data either company collects. So we have 94 million frequent shopper cards, so mostly CPG. We are we are US based CPG measurement. We do some retail, we do some CRM. So that, and our idea is to have multiple data sets for each data point that we have. So we have our frequent shopper data, but we also have from Nielsen RMS, that's the retail measurement service that has, national sales. And then we have HomeScan, which is very projectable and balanced to the US. So our frequent shopper data is convenience data, right? It's collected from the stores that are willing to give us the data, and then we can look at where are our biases, what are we missing, how do we fit things together. So that's the shopping side of it. For television, we have Our big data is set-top box. Our small currency data is NPM. So we have the Nielsen People Meter, and we put those together. We have, for digital, we have lots of ways of collecting the digital data, whether it's cookies or maids or sign-on IDs. So we collect that information from many different providers for mobile, for desktop, for all the entire digital realm. For magazines, we match in subscriber studies, the subscriber lists. So we know every subscriber in the US. It's our only census level data. So we have every name and address of who subscribes, right? But then we have MRI to help us project. Radio, we only have the currency data, PPM for radio, because there isn't a big data set out there that you can collect for radio. And then there's, we would love someday for there to be outdoor. We'd love to have your
we will have to have a follow-up conversation about that, Leslie.
Yeah. So
We
the
would love
idea is
to be a part of it. So
yeah. So the idea is that we get all the touch points, as many touch points as possible, and then measure what are the incremental value. And that's what we'll be talking a lot about today.
great. So I think because of the nature of your business and understanding what's happening in grocery, understanding what's happening in convenience, you're really in a very unique position to understand some significant changes that have happened to consumer behavior over the last however many months since
That's right.
COVID appeared. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing?
Yeah. So, our data is complete from the frequent shopper data within 3 days. We have something like 90 something percent within a day, but 3 days we have complete data. So we can track what's happening in the market really closely and how people are buying and changing and what's up. So the first thing we did was segment time. So we looked at when the pandemic came along, we said, okay, there's before the pandemic, pre-pandemic, right? And then there's a preparedness phase through February and into the beginning of March, where the word was out. You see hand sanitizer sales growing substantially. People are beginning to be aware, but they don't know how big it is, right? And then March 11th, at about 3 o'clock, the NBA decided they were gonna shut down. There were a couple announcements from the White House, and it was extreme buying ensued, and we had about 10 days of absolutely off the charts. You all will remember those times where people were buying like, and it was really buying in ways that were illogical, like water disappeared completely out of stock. Well, it's not a hurricane. We're going to have electricity. This is a pandemic, like it was a very knee jerk. I need to, is anything going to be on the shelves? Shelves started being empty. So we have that roughly 10-day period, March 11th through the 22nd. And then we go into home confinement. And we've seen slowly across time a gradual decline back to general buying. And let me show you a graph of that. So here's shopping that we see across the 4 regions of the country. And you can see in the beginning of February, we're going along, there's a slight uptick, extreme buying takes off, right? And then slow decline across time. So this is the spend per household, right? So people are spending more money. And what's fascinating is you can see across the country, everybody is, the pattern, whether or not you're east, west, south, north, is very much the same across time, right? The whole country is reacting to this. sort of regardless of when the stay-at-home orders came, when the wear masks came, restaurants opened or closed, you see a little uptick July 4th. There's an uptick in at Easter, but pretty much very, very stable patterns across time.
Interesting. So is that starting to tick back up again, or has that still kind of trailed off?
Well, you can see at the end, it is just beginning to tick back up. But I really don't expect to see extreme buying come back. I think extreme buying was really a panic mode. I don't think people are thinking panic. They now know that our supply chain isn't going to fall out of the bottom. We know how to make toilet paper. We know how to, for home use. We know how to stock, right? We know the kinds of things people are buying. At the beginning, we saw lots and lots of out of stocks, right? And that actually we said, we better make sure that our sales effect measurement can actually function well in this whole arena. So we actually said, we added several variables to our sales effects. Now, because the method that we use is matching. So we say the people who were not exposed versus the people who were exposed, how did their behavior differ? Well, it didn't. People who were not exposed also were in the middle of the pandemic. There wasn't a bias there, right? So in matching, we saw that the vast majority was taken care of. But the two variables that we did add, one was basket size, because we could see that there were people who were dramatically increasing their buying. They were panicking much more than other people. And we also added out of stock, because you could go to the store and if people weren't buying the same items, they were buying different items. It was, So those two pieces we had to add in order to make sure that we were still, that our measurement were still valid. They would have been valid without them, but this improved the model fits slightly, and that gave us a good feeling that we were doing the right thing.
Interesting. So I think when we had discussed, there were some brand loyalty changes that you had seen in the data as well.
Yes. So when I started at NC Solutions, there were so many questions. We would regularly get the question of, I want to target people who are having something big change in their life. I want to see people who are life stages are changing. They're having a baby, they're getting married, they're buying a house, because that's a moment when you're doing new things and you're open to new products and you're up for loyalty shifts, right? Well, the pandemic totally disrupted the world, right? It changed everybody's behavior. It was a worldwide major event. I mean, the reason we couldn't do those well in the past was, you think, how many people got married this week? It's a small number, they're hard to find, and then they're gone. It's not a great target. So they tend to be too small, but we have an opportunity here because the whole world, right, sort of got overwhelmed by a life change. And all of that was further exacerbated by the out of stocks. So even if, you weren't just buying more and addressing more needs, you'd go to the store and your favorite brand wasn't there. So you had to try other things. So loyalty was completely disrupted. And I want to share with you some information on that. So here's some slides. So this is brand A. And what we're doing is tracking brand share across time. And you can see this brand A, the slope, the orange dots are going down slightly. The slope of that line is a minus 0.1766. And the brand, so they're losing brand share slowly across time. And then extreme buying happens. And post extreme buying, during this stay-at-home phase, the brand share has grown tremendously. It's up 0.03%. Big increase, right? So we see this is a common thing. We've been looking at a body of work called How to Build Brands, which has 6 years of tracking. And you see very steady loyalty patterns like this. Like brand share just stays very steady. It might bounce around for seasonal things, but there's a very steady pattern. And all of a sudden, this pandemic has thrown this completely up in the air. We can also look at how that changed. So this is year over year loyalty. So each little bar is a different week. And we're saying, were you growing or declining in non-category, non-brand, non-loyal brand switchers? And so the colored bars are the brand buyers. And if you're below the line, you were losing brand share amongst those people. And if you're above the line, you were gaining brand share among those people, or consumers. And you can see that they were really declining brand share up until the end of August 2018. And then they did something different. And from that August to the next August, they're gaining, right? So they're, whatever they did for that's their, clearly their marketing year. They've got a new message. It's making them build loyalty. You can see the loyalty is growing, right? Year over year. They get into 2020 and it's, or, you know, the end of 2019, early 2020, and it's up and down. But when the pandemic hit, you see the gray bars growing dramatically. You see the colored bars growing dramatically, certainly during that extreme buying period. But consistently across the stay-at-home, they've grown share, and they've grown it among new buyers as well as existing. Interestingly, the loyal doesn't seem to be a consistent win, and isn't the biggest piece, where before this, it was a very big piece of their purchasing, right? So this brand is growing share, which is what you saw on the last slide. And I just show you one other because they're just fascinating. We have them for about 50. And this one, you know, they were growing across time and the pandemic hit. And if you had extended that line, kept extending that line, you would have expected them to continue to grow, but instead they dip below where their expected growth would have been. So they're not doing as well. They're still great gaining share, but it's not growing as much as it had been. So we're seeing, you know, they're not benefiting from the pandemic quite as much. And when we look at what the kind of buyers are, you see that so much of their buying comes from loyal buyers. And they've been building loyalty consistently, right? So this brand, it is still a growing brand. It's still doing well. It's not keeping up with its competitors, right? So the whole category is doing really well. They're doing well, but not as well as they had been. So yes, loyalty is all over the place. And just for the last slide, we looked at 50 of these as part of our building brands. You can see that pre-pandemic, there were 20 brands that had declining brand shares. There were 17 that were flat and 13 with growing. And this is the size of the curve, how much they were growing. And if we look at post-pandemic, about 29% were below trend, 29 continued, and 43 were above trend. So if you say on or above, really huge percentage, right? 70 plus percent were on or above trend. So the pandemic has really been good for brands. And with all this loyalty changing, advertising has the opportunity to cement those new buyers in as your buyers. It's a huge opportunity. It's a huge moment for advertisers to capture those triers and turn them into loyal buyers. It's something that advertising does really well. It connects the consumer's heart with the brand. It says, you know, it makes the brand meaningful to the consumer. And here they've tried it. go make that connection real, right? And if you were the big brand in the category and you were out of stock, you might want to remind people of why they were connected to you, and bring them back into the fold. So it's a big upheaval in the world, and an opportunity certainly for everyone to benefit from higher advertising spend.
So what of these trends do you think are temporary, and which ones are going to be potentially longer term or even permanent?
Well, I think a lot of people who didn't know how to cook are now able to cook. They had to learn, right? I think that I think people will, when they finally are able to really go out and be out in the world free, will burst out of the doors and be so happy to be free. But I think that fundamentally, it's a different world. Fundamentally, we've learned all, either we're home taking care of children and learning how to do that differently, or we're either married, have a better marriage, or are divorced. I think that it's been hard for people to live together. I think people living alone may be more lonely. I think there's a lot of fragmentation. People are going to be in very different places, but I think our new normal will not be back to where it was. I think the idea that people want to go back to where they were is just a huge mistake. I think for waiting for the world to return to where it was sets you up to fail. You have to really sit where you are today and say, how do I succeed today with the choices that I have today? How do I make choices that how do I make myself happy? How do I have a good life and a balanced life and a full life today? And when we come back to a new normal, it will be different. And we'll be in a different place with it, right? But I really don't believe that there will be extreme buying. I don't think that even the extreme upticks, we're not seeing increased buying across the board. A little, but nothing like it was in March. It's just not going to happen.
Great. So Leslie, we know that a lot of advertisers pulled back ad spend in a very reactionary way when we started to head into the pandemic. What are you seeing now? And are you seeing that advertisers are starting to put money back in? And are those who are spending in marketing doing better than those who have maybe scaled back and haven't re-entered the marketplace?
Yeah, so there was a lot of our clients stopped. There was a large group that just didn't know how to respond. What do you do in the midst of all this fear? But they're coming back. They're, almost all are back in. There's nervousness, certainly. Everybody's a little bit, what do we say? How do we address this? How do we connect with the consumer? But I also see a lot more focus on this loyalty idea. It really has resonated that and it's what advertising does so well, that the focus has shifted for the last few years on just growing brand share. And the interesting thing about that it kind of means focus on your non-brand buyers. If you're only about penetration, it says, forget your consumer, go look at the people who aren't consuming. Well, if you've been advertising to them and connecting with them, you fared really well through this, so building loyalty really is important. And I think this has really shown that that's a critical piece to keeping, what is brand equity? What is customer lifetime value? What is the value of the long term for the for the brand? And it really is in building equity and loyalty.
So all of those upper funnel metrics that we learned about in school are still important, and they're still a part of the purchase cycle?
They certainly are.
Oh,
In
yay.
fact, I'd say most of the basics are still the basics. That's what we see across the board.
I love that. Like that last click that lower funnel has gotten so much attention in recent years, but to hear that upper funnel, that awareness driving and brand loyalty, all of those important metrics prior to purchase are still really important.
That's right.
Well, thanks. So, my final question is, Leslie, speaking frankly, if you were to put one message out to the world on out-of-home advertising across the country, what would it be?
Um, it would be, we can get through this together.
Oh, I love it. So, Leslie, if people want to learn more about NCS, how can they get in touch with all of you?
So we have a website, ncsolutions.com. There is a section in there. It's go.ncsolutions.com. How advertising works has all the papers and all the things that we've written on thought leadership.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining today. You have all been really great about putting out free information. So I do encourage anyone who's listening to visit the website. There's a lot of fantastic content that we weren't able to touch on today. Leslie, thank you for your generosity and your friendship. I really appreciate it.
Oh,
And
Kim,
thank
it's so
you.
nice of you to invite us. We
Oh,
really
it was
appreciate
an
it.
honor. Thank you. And thank you everyone who joined today. If you have any questions, you can always email us at geekout@geopath.org. If it's about this session, you can contact us using the subject line, Speaking Frankly Questions. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.